You are fired!
A ruthless CEO, an exhausted widowed waiter, a little girl who only wants a birthday cake. What began on that ordinary night of a firing test was not just another cruel power game. It was a calculated experiment to destroy the life of a stranger and prove that only the coldest survive. A plan that would have worked perfectly if that child's heart had not failed right in front of her. This is the story of how a woman used to taking everything from everyone lost her own empire to discover that true strength is choosing to care for someone who cannot offer her anything in return. Victoria Hartwell destroyed lives for sport until one changed her forever. A widowed waiter, a dying child, a CEO about to lose everything she built. This is the story of how a woman raised to worship strength lost her empire to save a little girl, and finally found a family worth living for. The boardroom on the 47th floor of Hartwell Industries gleamed with polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed Manhattan like a trophy. Victoria Hartwell stood at the head of the table, her charcoal suit sharp as a blade, her expression carved from ice. The afternoon sun slanted through the glass, casting long shadows across the conference table. Across from her sat Michael Carson, a waiter from the executive dining room, still wearing his server's uniform because he'd been summoned directly from his shift. His calloused hands rested on the table, steady despite the tremor in his jaw. He had the look of a man who'd been bracing for bad news his entire life, shoulders squared, spine straight, eyes clear. "Mr. Carson," Victoria said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had silenced corporate raiders and hostile boards. "Do you understand why you're here?" Michael met her eyes with a quiet dignity that made something flicker in her chest. "No, ma'am, I don't." "Then let me clarify." She slid a manila folder across the table, the sound of paper on wood loud in the silence. "Your performance has been inadequate. Hartwell Industries maintains the highest standards, and unfortunately, you've fallen short. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated." The silence that followed should have been filled with pleading or anger. Victoria had seen both 100 times in this room, the desperate bargaining, the raised voices, the tears. Instead, Michael simply nodded once, slowly, as if absorbing a physical blow. His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed clear. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "May I ask, could I finish out the week, my daughter? Her birthday is Saturday. I promised her a cake from the bakery she likes." Victoria had expected rage. She had expected desperation. She had run this test on janitors and drivers and kitchen staff, and they always responded with some version of self-preservation, begging for their jobs, listing their qualifications, promising to do better. She had not expected a father worried about disappointing a child. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Carson. Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be mailed." He stood, nodded once more, and walked to the door with the same quiet dignity he'd carried into the room. He didn't slam it. He didn't look back. He simply left, and the sound of the door clicking shut felt more final than she had anticipated. Victoria stood alone in the boardroom, surrounded by glass and steel and the city spread out below like a kingdom she'd conquered. For the first time in years, something like doubt seeped through the cracks of her armor. Michael Carson woke every morning at 4:30, not because he liked the darkness, but because it was the only way to make everything fit. His one-bedroom apartment in Queens smelled like cheap coffee brewed in a machine held together with duct tape and prayer. The floorboards creaked beneath his feet as he moved through the pre-dawn quiet, careful not to wake Emma. He drank his coffee black, standing by the kitchen window, watching the city wake up while his daughter slept in the only bedroom. He'd taken the pull-out couch in the living room 2 years ago, after Sarah died. The springs poked through the thin mattress and his back ached most mornings but giving. Emma her own room, for her drawings, her books, the stuffed animals that still held traces of Sarah's perfume, had never felt like a sacrifice. Sarah had been the dreamer, the one who believed in artist lofts and beach vacations and summers that smelled like sunscreen instead of antiseptic. She had been the one who knew how to make Emma laugh so hard she snorted, a sound that used to make the bills and the medical debt and the constant strain of survival fade to the background. When the cancer took her, it took that sound with it. Now Michael carried the weight of two parents on one pair of shoulders. Some days it felt like carrying an entire building on his back. He moved through the same ritual every morning: shower, dress, prep Emma's lunch, lay out her clothes, pack her backpack, before the sun cleared the horizon and the real world demanded his attention. By 5:30, he was on the subway, pressed between early shift nurses and delivery drivers, all of them wearing the same quiet exhaustion. The train screeched through dark tunnels while he stared at his reflection in the dirty window and thought about birthday cake and whether $15 was too much when the rent was already late. By 6:15, he was in the executive kitchen of Hartwell Industries, prepping coffee stations and arranging pastries with a precision that had earned him quiet respect from the catering manager. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never caused problems, never asked for favors. He just showed up, did the work, and went home to Emma. Emma, 7 years old, with Sarah's green-gray eyes that shifted with every mood, bright when she was happy, storm-dark when she was sad. Emma, who still asked when Mommy was coming back, even though it had been 2 years. Emma, who drew pictures of their family at school, 3 stick figures holding hands, one with angel wings hovering above them. Emma, who needed him to be enough. The morning after the meeting in the boardroom, Michael stood in his usual spot by the window, his coffee gone cold in his hand. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold that felt almost mocking. He had told Emma he might be home a little later than usual that week. He hadn't told her about the termination. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that the world doesn't care about birthday cakes or promises or fathers doing their best? Daddy? Her voice floated from the bedroom doorway, small and sleep-rough. She stood in her unicorn pajamas, blonde hair tangled from sleep, clutching the stuffed bear Sarah had given her 3 Christmases ago. Is today the cake day? His heart cracked and tried to heal at the same time. Not yet, sweetheart. Saturday. Will Mommy know it's my birthday in heaven? Michael knelt and pulled her into his arms, breathing in strawberry shampoo and lavender fabric spray. She knows. She always knows. Do you think she's sad she can't be here? I think she's so proud of you she can't stop smiling. Emma considered this with deep seriousness. Okay, can I have crackers for breakfast? Sure, baby. He held her a moment longer than usual, then let her go. All he had was the weight of his daughter in his arms, the promise of Saturday's cake, and the same quiet prayer he whispered every morning. Please let me be enough. Victoria Hartwell had learned about strength from a man who believed weakness was worse than cruelty. Her father, Richard Hartwell, had built his empire by testing everyone around him, employees, competitors, even his own daughter. She'd been 16 when he first tested her. Christmas break, senior year at boarding school. She came home buzzing with talk of college applications, of Princeton and Yale, and a future that felt wide open. Her father called her into his office, the same office she now occupied, and told her, in the same tone he used for quarterly reports, that her college fund was gone, lost in a bad investment. What will you do? He asked. Not I'm sorry. Not we'll fix this. Just, what will you do? Victoria sat in the chair across from his desk and felt something inside her harden like wet cement. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. She went back to school, applied for every scholarship she could find, got into Princeton on a full ride, graduated summa cum laude, built her own career, and never asked her father for money again. Years later, at 28, Already running a division of Hartwell Industries, she finally got the rest of the story. The money had never been lost. It had all been a test. People reveal themselves under pressure, Victoria, he said, actually smiling. Strength is what remains when everything else is stripped away. You proved you had it. Most people don't. Relief never came. Vindication did. The test had been cruel, but it had forged something in her, and she took that lesson and buried it deep. When her father died 5 years later, leaving her the company and the philosophy that had shaped her life, she stepped into power with a simple creed: test everyone, trust no one, and never confuse compassion with strength. Under her leadership, the company grew 38%. The board called her brilliant. The press called her ruthless. Wall Street called her a force of nature. She wore each label like another piece of armor. The termination test was a refinement of her father's methods. She picked employees in low-level positions, janitors, drivers, cafeteria workers, people who lived close to the edge. She staged their terminations to see how they reacted. Those who raged were let go. Those who begged were given standard severance and a polished, useless recommendation letter. The rare few who showed something else, dignity under pressure, concern for others in the middle of their own crisis, those were the ones she quietly promoted or protected. Michael Carson was supposed to be another data point. His file showed steady performance, perfect attendance, no complaints. Widower, one dependent child, ongoing medical debt, living paycheck to paycheck in Queens. She had expected him to cling to his job like a lifeline. Instead, he thought about his daughter's birthday cake. In her office that night, surrounded by glass and quiet and the city glittering far below, Victoria opened Michael's file again. This time she read it slowly. High school graduate. Wife deceased cancer 2 years ago. One dependent child, age 7. No disciplinary issues. Commendations from the catering manager for exceptional reliability and kindness to colleagues. Kindness. The word stuck out like a wildflower in a spreadsheet. She closed the folder and stared out at the Manhattan skyline, the lights of buildings filled with people she would never know. Something in her chest felt different, not soft exactly, but less solid, like ice beginning to shift. She picked up the phone. Pull the security footage. Michael Carson, executive dining. Last 30 days. I want to see everything. The footage showed things no performance review could capture. Michael arriving 40 minutes early every shift to help George. A dishwasher pushing 70 lift supply boxes that were clearly too heavy for him. Michael staying late, unpaid, to train a new hire whose English was halting, repeating instructions with patient clarity. Michael on Thursdays, always Thursdays, stepping outside during his 15-minute break to split his lunch with the same homeless veteran near the service entrance. Half a sandwich. An apple. Sometimes a granola bar. No big gestures. Just consistency. Michael's face as he talked with the man, tired but open, with a real smile that didn't appear anywhere else on the footage. Victoria cross-referenced his financials as she did with every test subject. $32,000 a year. $1,500 in rent. Monthly payments to Queens Memorial Hospital for Sarah's final treatment. No streaming services, no restaurant splurges, no unnecessary charges. But in the margins, there were small transfers. $5 to Emma's school fund. $10 to a children's literacy nonprofit. $15 to Sullivan's Bakery on the 17th. She checked HR's records. Emma's date of birth, the 17th. The only luxury purchase in a month of survival was a cake for his daughter. Victoria leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. She had spent more than that on a single glass of wine. She had never had to choose between birthday cake and groceries. She picked up the phone again before she could talk herself out of it. Michael Carson. Reinstate him immediately. Effective tomorrow. Create a new position, Senior Catering Coordinator. Salary $58,000, full benefits package. Retroactive bonus to cover the week he missed. Ma'am, we don't have that position. Create it. She hung up and stared at the phone. This was not how the test was supposed to work. She was supposed to observe, evaluate, and act according to a clean principle. Instead, she was feeling wrong, as if all the certainty she built her life on had shifted half an inch to the left. Michael's phone rang on a Tuesday morning while he was walking Emma to school. The October sky was clear and sharp. Emma hummed something from music class, swinging his hand. The HR director's voice on the line was professional and faintly puzzled. There had been an error. His termination was being rescinded. He was being promoted, new title, higher salary, full benefits. Retroactive to the day of the original meeting. Daddy, you stopped walking. Michael stood frozen on the sidewalk. The phone pressed against his ear, words tumbling but not landing. Reinstated. Promoted. Benefits. Retroactive. Daddy? He realized he was crying only when Emma reached up and brushed his cheek with the back of her hand. Why are you sad? I'm not sad, baby. He swallowed hard. How do you explain relief to a 7-year-old? How do you explain what it's like when the crushing weight on your chest suddenly lifts just enough to let you breathe? I'm happy, he said finally, pulling her into a hug right there on the sidewalk. I'm really, really happy. Because of the cake? He laughed, the sound cracking on the way out. Yeah, baby. Because of the cake. The weeks that followed felt like stolen time. 2 weeks of sleeping through the night. 2 weeks of paying bills on time and buying real groceries instead of stretching canned soup. 2 weeks of watching Emma draw and read and argue about bedtime like any other kid. 2 weeks. And then Emma collapsed during recess on a Thursday afternoon. The ICU at Queen's Memorial smelled like disinfectant and fear. Emma lay in the bed, small and fragile and almost swallowed by the tangle of wires and tubes. Machines beeped and flat in different rhythms. Her blonde hair was spread across the pillow, her skin pale against the white sheets. The cardiologist talked about genetic cardiomyopathy and ventricular dysfunction and emergency transplant list. He mentioned survival rates and waiting periods and best-case scenarios. Michael heard only the meaning beneath the words. Your daughter is dying, and there is nothing you can do to stop it. He sat beside her bed and held her hand, feeling her pulse flutter against his thumb like a bird in a trap. She woke once, briefly, eyes hazy and unfocused. I'm sorry, Daddy. What are you sorry for, baby? For being expensive. The words sliced through him more deeply than any medical term. He managed to hold it together until she drifted back to sleep. Then he stepped into the hallway, walked until his legs stopped working, and slid down the wall. His body shook with sobs he tried to smother in his sleeve. He could not let her hear him breaking. Hours blurred, doctors, nurses, forms, explanations that didn't help. By 3 a.m, the corridor outside the ICU was almost empty, lit by cold fluorescent strips. That was when he heard her voice. Mr. Carson, he looked up. Victoria Hartwell stood there, completely out of place in a designer coat over what looked like hastily thrown-on clothes. Her hair pulled back in a way he'd never seen, less precise, almost careless. He tried to stand, but the attempt collapsed into an awkward half-rise. His legs wouldn't cooperate. He ended up back on the floor, too tired to be embarrassed. Sit down, Victoria said quietly. Then she did something that startled them both. She lowered herself to the floor beside him, the expensive fabric of her coat brushing the scuffed linoleum. For a while, they just sat there. The hospital hummed around them, distant monitors, soft voices, the constant low buzz of electricity. Tell me what happened, she said at last. He talked because there was nothing else to do, because the fear had been rattling around inside his chest for hours with nowhere to go. He told her about the playground, about the phone call from the school, about the ambulance, the monitors, the words that all seemed to mean the same thing. He told her about the transplant list and the odds, about the parts of the treatment the insurance wouldn't cover. He told her about Sarah, about the fear of reliving another slow-motion loss, this time with no wife to lean on and no backup plan left to invent. When he finally ran out of words, his voice was raw. Victoria hadn't moved. "The bills will be covered," she said. "All of them. Hartwell Industries has a medical crisis fund." She was inventing it as she spoke, but her tone left no room for doubt. "Emma will have the best pediatric cardiologist in New York. I'll make the calls tonight. You'll have paid leave for as long as you need." Michael stared at her. "Why?" "Because you thought of birthday cake," he blinked. "What?" "The termination was a test, Mr. Carson. I test people to see who they are under pressure." For a heartbeat, something unguarded flickered in her eyes. "You passed." "I'm not sure I did." She stood, smoothing her coat, and walked away. But she did not go home. She spent the rest of the night on her phone, calling the hospital's financial office, the head of pediatric cardiology at Mount Sinai, her personal attorney, and her contact on the board. By sunrise, Emma had been transferred to a private room. A new insurance arrangement was in place, and an entire medical fund existed where there had been none hours before. For the first time since she was 16, Victoria had made a decision based purely on feeling, not strategy. It scared her more than any hostile takeover ever had. 3 days later, Victoria returned to the hospital carrying 2 cups of coffee from an Italian place on 5th Avenue that charged $12 a cup and still had a line every morning. Michael was in the hallway again, looking like he'd slept in a chair and lost the fight. She handed him a cup. "What were you looking for?" she asked. "When you thought you'd lost your job?" He frowned. "I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to make it to Saturday. For the cake. For her smile when she saw it." He wrapped both hands around the cup. "My wife used to say strength wasn't about what you could endure alone. It was about what you'd endure for someone else. I didn't understand that until she was gone. Now Emma is why I wake up, why I keep moving. Without her ... He stopped, the words jamming in his throat. "Without her, I don't have a reason to live. There's a difference." The sentence hit her like a blow. She had spent 36 years surviving, climbing, winning. She had never once thought about who she would live for. "I don't think I have anyone I'd live for," she said, and it startled her that the words came out aloud. Michael studied her for a moment. "Then maybe you need to find someone," he said simply, "before you run out of time to learn the difference." Inside Emma's room, the little girl was awake, coloring with careful concentration. When she saw Victoria, her whole face lit up. "Are you Miss Victoria? Daddy said you're helping me get better." "I'm trying," Victoria said. "Can I show you something?" Emma held up her drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands. One in a suit, one in regular clothes. One small with pigtails. Behind them, a house with bright purple windows. "That's my new family. Daddy says families are the people who show up when you're scared." Victoria's chest tightened. "You're very brave, Emma. Mommy used to say brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and loving people anyway." Emma tilted her head, studying Victoria with a seriousness far older than 7. "Are you scared?" "Yes," Victoria said before she could stop herself. "Of what?" "Of everything." Emma reached out and took her hand, her fingers small and warm. "That's okay. Daddy's scared too. But we're scared together, so it's not as scary. You can be scared with us if you want." Standing there, hand held by a child hooked up to machines, Victoria felt something break open inside her. A wall she had fortified since her father's test. For once, she didn't rush to rebuild it. The board meeting had been scheduled weeks earlier, but it landed right in the middle of Victoria's unraveling. Gerald Morrison, one of the senior board members, had been waiting for an opening. He got it the morning a headline hit the financial news feeds. Billionaire CEO S sick games. Hartwell executive caught testing employees with fake terminations. Someone had leaked Michael's story. Not the reinstatement, not the promotion, not the medical fund, just the cruelty. The boardroom was full when she walked in. Tablets lit with the article. Faces set. Victoria, Morrison began, his tone grave but satisfied, these allegations represent serious ethical concerns and potential liability. If true, they're true, she said. Gasps, whispers, a few chairs shifting. Morrison raised a hand for quiet. Then we must act quickly, he continued. We're calling an immediate vote on your removal as CEO. She could have fought. She had lawyers. She knew where bodies were buried, figuratively speaking. Her father would have walked into this room with threats and counter-leverage and walked out still in charge. Instead, she looked around the table and thought of a little girl in a hospital bed and a man on a corridor floor. Before you vote, she said, I want to tell you what the article didn't. One of the directors muttered, We've read enough. Then you don't know anything, Victoria replied, stepping toward the windows and turning back to face them. Michael Carson is a widower raising a sick child on $32,000 a year. When I tested him, I expected him to beg. Instead, he asked to work one more week so he wouldn't break a promise to his daughter about a birthday cake. She let that settle for a beat. 3 weeks later, that little girl collapsed from a genetic heart condition. The surgery and treatment would have bankrupted them. I authorized full coverage, not as charity. As responsibility for a system I designed that treated people's lives like case studies. Morrison lifted his chin. That does not erase the ethical breach of, you're right. It doesn't. Her voice sharpened. My father taught me that strength meant standing alone, that compassion was weakness, that people were assets or liabilities. I built this company on those rules. We grew 38%. We crushed competitors. We became an industry example. She paused, then said quietly, and I was empty. Eyes flicked down around the table. No one spoke. Michael Carson showed me what real strength looks like, she continued. It's not standing alone in a corner office. It's thinking about birthday cake when you've just been fired. It's splitting your lunch with a homeless veteran every Thursday on a barely livable salary. Sharp gray eyes, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal pantsuit with a crisp white blouse and black stilettos, minimal silver jewelry, cool and controlled expression. It's falling apart in a hospital hallway because your child might die and you would take her place without hesitation. Her voice shook, but she didn't back off. So go ahead and vote me out, she said. I engineered those tests. I deserve to be held accountable. But the medical fund, the training on dignity, the scholarships for employees' children, those changes are already set in motion. Fire me if you need to. I'm done building an empire on fear. If I build anything going forward, it will be on love. Morrison's mouth was a hard line. Your father would be ashamed of what you're saying. For the first time in a long time, Victoria actually smiled. Good, she said. That means I finally stopped being his reflection. The vote wasn't close. 7-4. She lost the title. She was given until the end of the month to clear her office. Walking out of the building that afternoon, Manhattan roaring around her, she waited for the sense of collapse. Instead, she felt something lighter. Not safe, not secure, just ... free. On Victoria's last day at Hartwell Industries, the assistant who usually guarded her time waved someone through without asking. Michael stepped into her office carrying a small box wrapped in paper covered with uneven crayon stars and hearts. She's being released today, he said. Emma wanted you to have this. Victoria opened the box. Inside was the drawing from the hospital, 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a house with purple windows. Purple means hope, Michael explained. Her words. She says you need to live somewhere besides an office. Victoria traced one purple window with her thumb. I don't know how, she admitted quietly. Neither did I, Michael said. After Sarah died, I didn't know how to do anything but survive. Emma forced me to figure out how to live again. He met her eyes. The board was wrong about you. They weren't, she replied automatically. I did what they accused me of. And then you changed, he said. You admitted it. You fixed it. Most people never get that far. That takes more strength than never being wrong. She looked down at the drawing again. What do I do now? Whatever you want, he said, as if it were that simple. You're free. The word still felt unfamiliar on her tongue, but less like an accusation and more like a possibility. Freedom was terrifying until the text arrived. From an unknown number, Pizza Friday. You should come. Daddy makes it weird with vegetables, but it's still good. Emma, that Friday, Victoria stood on a cracked sidewalk in front of a brick apartment building in Queens, holding an expensive bottle of wine and more nervousness than she had felt in any boardroom. She pressed the buzzer, climbed the stairs, and stopped in front of a door covered with kids' drawings. Michael opened it with flour on his shirt and a grin that didn't look like the careful, guarded expression she'd seen at work. Hey, he said. You found us. The apartment was small but warm, layered with memories, Emma's artwork taped to the walls, framed photos of Sarah and Emma at different ages, shelves crammed with books and mismatched mugs. It smelled like baking dough and tomato sauce. They ate broccoli pizza at a small table with chipped edges. Emma talked nonstop about school, about the doctors, about her plan to become a doctor who also paints murals in hospital hallways. Michael watched her with a kind of quiet, overflowing love that made Victoria look away more than once. After Emma went to bed, they washed dishes side by side in the small kitchen. Thank you for coming, Michael said, drying a plate. Just to Emma? Victoria asked. He shook his head. To both of us. She set down the dish towel. I'm not good at this, she admitted. People. I was trained to see everyone as either an asset or a threat. And what am I? He asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. She thought about it. Terrifying, she said. His eyebrows lifted. Because you make me want things I don't know how to want, she clarified. Like this. A place that misses you when you're gone. People who notice if you don't come home. A life that's about more than surviving the next quarter. Then learn, Michael said simply. He took the dish towel from her and set it aside, then gently took her hand instead. His palms were rough and warm. We're all learning. For the second time in his presence, she cried. No boardroom, no crisis, no hostile takeover had ever broken her. A kitchen in Queens did. Michael just held her while the city hummed outside and the pipes rattled in the walls, and, piece by fragile piece, something inside her began to heal. 6 months later, the Hartwell Center opened in Brooklyn, a low, sunlit building with purple-framed windows and a courtyard that smelled of soil and possibility. It offered free medical clinics, job training, legal aid, after-school programs. It was everything her father's empire had never bothered to be. Victoria stood at a simple podium, facing a crowd that included former employees, neighborhood families, reporters, and a small girl in a bright jacket sitting on Michael's shoulders. My father built an empire, she said. This isn't an empire. It's a community. A place where being human isn't treated as a weakness but as strength. She didn't talk about quarterly growth or market share. She talked about medical bills and broken promises and birthday cakes that cost more than they should. She talked about how a single termination meeting had shown her more about strength than any boardroom ever had. When the speeches were done and the cameras drifted away, she found Emma in the new community garden out back, kneeling beside a raised bed and patting soil around a small plant with careful hands. Are you happy now? Emma asked without looking up. Victoria glanced around, the beds of herbs and flowers, The mural in progress on the far wall, the people laughing and talking and signing up for classes. Then she looked at Emma, alive and flushed and indignant about the possibility of too much fertilizer, and at Michael, who was talking with a volunteer but kept glancing over to make sure he could still see them. "Yes," Victoria said. "I finally am." "Good," Emma replied, standing and wiping dirty hands on her jeans. "Daddy says happiness isn't a place. It's who you bring with you." The purple windows of the Hartwell Center glowed as the sun slid lower. Victoria had lost an empire. She had lost the tallest office and the biggest salary and the sharpest titles. But standing there with soil under her nails and a child at her side and a man watching her like she was part of something worth protecting, she understood that none of those things had ever really been strength. Emma grabbed her hand. Michael walked over and took the other. Together they headed back toward the building, toward the noise and the light and the small, messy work of helping other people survive long enough to learn how to live. Victoria Hartwell had spent her life being tested. She had passed every exam her father set, conquered every target the world placed in front of her. But this, she knew now, was the only test that mattered. The courage to admit she needed other people and to choose love even when it made her vulnerable. For the first time since the day her father told her the money was gone, she felt strong, and this time not because she could stand alone, but because she had chosen not to.